That takes us to our main story that we want to talk about this week, because we have some new data on gun sales for the last month, the month of June. And it appears that they are down pretty significantly from last year, year over year, something like 20%. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Huge drop off. We haven't really been talking a lot about gun sales in recent months because honestly, they've been fairly stable. They've been declining since 2020, which is what you'd expect, right? It's not surprising because 2020 was this sort of perfect storm in terms of motivating people to buy guns, all the chaos that was happening from the pandemic to the riots to, the election. There was just a lot going on that might make somebody want to go out and buy a gun for self-defense or because they were afraid new gun laws could come into existence, and you'd expect that from that point, you're going to have a decline. But we've been looking for sort of the new normal, the floor, ever since then. We wrote about this back in 2021 that, are we at this new floor? Because look, we've come down, but we seem to have leveled off a bit. And now it's pretty clear that we haven't really completely leveled off in terms of gun sales in the United States. So, where are we going to level off? I guess would be the big question. And what are the implications of that for not just the gun industry, but the gun rights movement too? It's something that I wrote about as well for, actually not for members this week. That one is public. Usually our analysis pieces, right, are member exclusives. But this week, my analysis of the gun sales situation, that's free for everyone. So anyone who wants to get a taste of what our analysis is like should check that out.
Yeah, I agree. They should check it out because I think you raised a couple of good points. Particularly, we talked about, yes, they have leveled off. They're down something like 20% from last June and 50% from 2020's June, which obviously was the record month because of when it happened to land during the midst of the COVID pandemic, the George Floyd protests, and obviously the election was a few months away, but still that was on people's minds. But there are some factors that you pointed out in that piece that perhaps maybe could counteract some of this downside that we're seeing. Because it's worth pointing out that though we are down, gun sales are down, they're still pretty high, right? There's still over 1 million sales in a month, and there's been a huge streak of 1 million plus
gun background 47
checks.
Months. Yeah,
right.
Which is impressive.
And we're heading into primary season when you pointed out that the current president, Joe Biden, is made gun control a central tenet of his presidency, and there's no expectation that he's going to stop heading into the primary. So as that heats back up, do we see the spike come back? There's just a lot of factors to consider.
I mean, yeah, exactly. That's correct. But to me, that's also one of the things that makes it interesting that there was still a decline, right? Because Joe Biden is currently the president, right? He's not running to be president anymore. He is president, and he's not only been a very vocal advocate for new gun bans, but also has tried to implement them unilaterally through rulemaking. Right now, he's run into a lot of problems doing that, as we've covered on the show. But you'd think that would still keep the gun sales levels from slipping further. Now, again, you're right; they're still historically high. You're still like 30% up from where you were in 2019. So it's not like the industry is facing a recession by any means. But the fact that you had a 20% drop off from June 2022 to June 2023, that's a pretty big decline. That should raise some eyebrows, I think. And, it really raises the question, like, where is the actual floor going to be? Now, we are in an off year, unlike 2022. So there's no election this year. There was an election last year. June 2022 also saw, a new gun control bill actually pass in Congress, right? And it was also the month right before the assault weapons ban passed the House. Obviously, that didn't make it into law, but there's still a lot more attention on the politics of guns at that point in time than there are right now, frankly. And so, that could also clue you into that June 2022 is actually a particularly good June for gun sales. And that might be one of the reasons why there was such a decline from last year to this year. But the trend is still there overall, because you look at the second quarter numbers, you're still seeing declines across the board. It's not as severe as 20%. I think it's 6.7%. But the trend is clear, and what's not clear is where it's going to settle out.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And your point about last year's being when the gun control bill passed is well taken. And you have to wonder if perhaps maybe people understand now that we have a split Congress, and we have the Bruin test. Right? Yeah, I was going to say with the Bruin test, and they feel more comfortable in that their rights are secure, and they don't feel the same urge to go out and buy new guns because they don't think a ban is down the pike. But it is worth pointing out. I mean,
there's a lot of stability, which is not usually the both politically and economically and several other factors. Not that everything is perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it's better than it was certainly in 2020, right, or even 2021, and so that puts a damper to some degree, I would imagine, on gun sales. Although my last point on this, or actually, you had, what were you going to say?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say that it's worth pointing out that in a piece I wrote for this week's newsletter that we are seeing places where folks are turning to new gun sales. Yeah. We have a new poll from Siena College, polled all of New York residents, basically, and asked them how they were feeling about crime, whether they thought it was a concern. And overwhelmingly, New Yorkers reported being very concerned about crime. They said, I think 52% said they feared being a victim of crime out in public. And one of the things that they're doing to address this is going to purchase guns for self-defense. 12% of New Yorkers overall said that they went out and purchased a gun in the last year for self-defense. And 17% of New York City residents in particular, which I think is even more interesting just because of, you don't really associate gun ownership with New York City very often, but 17% actually said that they actually went and purchased a gun in the last year because of crime.
Right. And that, I think, rolls into my final point, actually, which is that, this is a good basis to get to what I was going to talk about. So I appreciate you bringing it up. It's a very good point. New York is, especially New York City, is not where you expect to see a lot of gun owners because it's very difficult to buy a gun there. And it's only become more difficult since Bruin, ironically. And now I think down the line that'll probably get sorted out and changed around by the courts. But for now, it's certainly true. And but you are still seeing these new gun owners come into the market, new people buying guns. Even in a place like New York. And obviously we had a huge surge of that during the 2020 gun buying spree. And that's the other point, I think, of concern. Because, not only is there a Democratic president who's a very staunch gun control advocate, which should historically has juiced gun sales, right? You saw that during the Obama administration. Then you saw it lull during the Trump administration. People called it the Trump slump, right? And you'd think that Biden being in there, who actually rhetorically is much more aggressive on gun control than even Barack Obama was. So, there should be more incentive. And then you also throw in the fact that there's all these new gun owners. So your floor should naturally be higher than it was before that spike of millions of new people buying guns. And it is for now, right? I don't want to get too far out on a limb here, but it is for now, but the continued decline from those 2020 levels is fascinating to see and could have implications both for the industry and, as I mentioned earlier, broader political implications. Like, what are these new gun owners doing? Like, are they as engaged as the pre-2020 gun owners? Are they less inclined to get into the hobby aspect of gun ownership and buy more guns, or there's just not a large percentage doing that yet. Maybe it's hard to say, but it's something that certainly I think needs more scrutiny from the gun rights movement and the industry itself to really understand what's going on.